Don't look now, but Kyle Pitts has 16 catches, 178 yards, and 1 touchdown in 6 games. For those doing the math at home, that's about 2 catches and 30 yards per game for a weapon that the Falcons just spent the 4th overall pick on a year ago. If you're like me, especially if you play a lot of fantasy football, you've probably been wondering this entire season long, what the hell's going on here? Is it a play calling issue? Is it a Marcus Mariota issue? Is it an issue with Kyle Pitts himself? And after digging through a whole lot of tape and a whole lot of different metrics this week, yes, to all of it, sort of. It's kind of complicated, and I think I just need to dive into the film straight away so that I can explain it better. So let's just do that. The Falcons' offense as a whole is somewhat one-dimensional. They run the ball a lot. As of the time of me writing this, they have the 4th most rushing attempts per game in the league at 33, and at the same time, they don't really like to throw the ball at all and have the 2nd fewest passing attempts per game at just 21.4. Hell, out of all the wins for Atlanta this year, the most times they've passed at all is 20 against Seattle, which conveniently was Pitt's best statistical game, go figure, and even in their loss last week to Cincinnati, where they were way behind from the very beginning, Arthur Smith outright refused to pass and tried to dig themselves out of that hole with the run game instead, so Marcus Mariota still only ended up with 13 total passing attempts in a brutal, horrific loss. It is a completely backwards offense by modern passing standards, I suppose, and it somewhat works for them sometimes, but it works for them at the expense of Kyle Pitts' production. One of the main tenets of this passing game, whenever they do decide to throw it, is play action, designed rollouts, and sprint outs. It's a very old school Mike Shanahan, Gary Kubiak type of passing attack, and the Falcons have run the 6th most designed rollouts or sprint outs across the entire NFL with 30, even despite having the 2nd fewest overall pass attempts, like I mentioned before. The problem, however, is that even though they really like to call these types of plays to try to generate explosive gains through the air, they're not very good at actually executing them. For starters, Pitts himself is woefully underutilized on these concepts, and he actually spends more time running shallow crosses or little flat routes than he does getting down the field and being isolated as a deep threat. To put some numbers to it, his total number of routes deeper than 5 yards on these concepts this year is 5, while his total number of snaps spent either blocking or running a short route underneath is more than double that at 13. So that in itself says a lot. They just don't like to use him as the receiving threat that he could be down the field, so nothing really scares defenses that much when Mariota is rolling out. But on top of all that, defenses these days are also just a lot better at identifying and playing against these types of concepts as well, so pretty much nobody on the Falcons offense can get open anyway. Bootlegs are so common now and reached all-time peaks of being run in 2020 and 2021 at roughly 90 instances per week across the league on any given Sunday, so most defenses are way more disciplined at stopping them now than they were even just 5 years ago, because quite frankly, they've seen so many of them. You look at this play against Seattle, for example, where Atlanta is trying to run weak side flood out of 21 personnel, and just watch how easily the Seahawks defense identifies this concept pre-snap. The boundary receiver, Drake London, is in a reduced split here, which you might think would signal that he's going to be cracking down on this linebacker and that it's a run play to the boundary, but the more logical read these days from a defensive perspective is that his split is this reduced so that he can run a crossing route and get to his spot as the mid-level option on a flood concept. Plus, with Pitts lined up in line to the field, and we know that he runs a lot of shallow routes in flood concepts for whatever reason, and this is 1st and 10, and it's 21 personnel. I mean, any NFL linebacker that started a bunch of games over the last couple of years is automatically going to piece this together that it's weak side flood off a play action fake. That is pretty much the passing concept that is run out of this formation on the hash in this down and distance. So knowing that and trusting that pre-snap read, the Seahawks linebackers don't believe that they need to cheat up that much to play the run. Brooks in particular just takes one step up and then bails out to get into his passing lane and force Mariota to hold this ball because he kind of knows that this is coming before the ball is even snapped. Every NFL defense with veteran linebackers would probably react this way these days. The deep receiver is bracketed inside and out, so he can't run a post, and he definitely can't run a high 7. The mid-level cross from London has Brooks sitting inside of it, so that's basically off the table now. And Pitts, once again, is pretty much out of this play from the jump anyway because they have him running a flat route to draw coverage and help space out the concept. There is absolutely nothing there, so Mariota just has to tuck and run and try to get whatever yards he can with his feet. Whether it's through disciplined zone coverage, or playing really aggressive up front and sending blitzes, or allowing backside edge players to just chase the quarterback regardless of whether it's a run or a pass so they can get free pressure. There's a lot of different ways for a defense to handle bootlegs and crossing routes these days when the quarterback is moved out of the pocket. And so looking across the NFL landscape this year, because of the rise of all these different zone coverages and the corresponding steady decline of the use of straight up man coverage, these bootlegs and crossers are starting to get called less than they were called over the last 2 years because every defense can identify them pre-snap very easily and they all know what to do to stop them. Even Kyle Shanahan, the guy who everyone looks to as the coach who likes to call bootlegs, since the 2019 season, his offense has been no higher than 18th in the NFL in calling those types of dropbacks after being in the top 10 for most of his years with San Francisco, Atlanta, Cleveland, and Washington. So even he started to see that trend and moved away from it because he saw the oversaturation of that concept coming, and he knew the defenses would eventually be much better at stopping it, which right now they are. So to make a very long point short, the Falcons run at a ridiculously high rate, which limits the amounts of passing snaps that Kyle Pitts is getting on a per game basis, and even in the passing snaps that he is getting, many of them are somewhat wasted, with him either being a blocker or with him being a checkdown option within mildly outdated play calls that don't quite work as well as they used to. Keep in mind that these are just some of the issues that I have with the Falcons offense schematically in terms of how they handle a talent like Kyle Pitts. And if I was going to be really nitpicky and point out everything that I have a problem with, we'd be here for a while. But what about Pitts himself? And what about Mariota himself? Because surely those two are not blameless here either, right? How much of this overall lack of production is their own fault within this system? And what are some of the things that Atlanta and Pitts and Mariota can do going forward in order to, try to be more productive? There is a faint little glimmer of hope for that last question there, and I do think that, at least looking at the tape, there are some very valid answers for it. But before I get into all those, I do want to thank Cuts for helping to sponsor this episode and making it possible in the first place. I just went out to SoFi Stadium, not this past Monday night, but the previous Monday night for that Broncos-Chargers Monday night game, which I'm sure a lot of you guys turned off at halftime, but I slogged my way through 4 quarters of that one. It was something. Oh, by the way, semi-related, not totally in line with this ad read, but in the lower bowl in SoFi, you can get a 4-ounce pour of Balvenie 14 Caribbean cask for like $22, which is outrageous for a stadium. Again, has nothing to do with Cuts, but if you go to SoFi, go to that bar. It's crazy. Anyway, I was at SoFi Monday night. It was chilly, but not cold, so this hoodie I thought was perfect for that because it's really soft, really comfortable, but not too hot, not too heavy. It's kind of like the perfect California winter hoodie, so to speak. It's a really nice cut. It's flattering for a guy like me who's, put on the freshman 15 a few different times in his life. I'm not really used to clothes that fit my kind of body perfectly, but it does, and it's really flattering. So I think the colors are great. The style is great. It's really comfortable. It fits a guy who's shaped like me. If you're anything like me and you have any sort of taste like this, go check out Cuts. They have everything that you could possibly want. They have really nice quality shirts of, variety of styles. They have polos, they have shorts, they have joggers, they have hoodies, they have jackets. They got everything. It's a really big catalog, tons of high quality products, great colors, great aesthetic. Go check them out. And if you like anything in the catalog and you want a discount, you can get a 15% off promo code at my link in the description below. That is cuts.team/filmroom, promo code filmroom, and that'll get you a 15% off discount. Thank you to Cuts for not just the hoodie, but for helping to sponsor this show. My wife is already stealing this thing a lot, so thanks for that. I lose another article of clothing thanks to you. Anyway, that all being said, why don't we continue on our journey through the season of hell for Kyle Pitts? There's 2 parts to this half of the video. Part 1 is about some of the problems that Pitts and Mariota have had themselves, beyond just the overall schematic issues in Atlanta that we already talked about. And part 2 is on some of the ways that I still think the Falcons can try to feed him the ball within their scheme in order to hopefully make everybody happy again. First up, let's talk about the problems. To me, priority number 1 for this offense should be developing chemistry down the field. Pitts may not have a whole lot of targets past 10 yards, but on the few targets he does have, you can tell that both he and Mariota really are not on the same page when it comes to reading defensive back leverage and knowing when to hang the ball deep down the field and when to attack back shoulder instead. Let's look at this example against the Seahawks one more time, which again was Pitt's most productive game, but I think it could have been way more productive if Mariota was reading Pitt's leverage the way that Kyle expected him to. This is an isolated fade route backside against an off-man corner, and the DB is playing way over the top of it and not being too aggressive because he knows that Pitts has legit 4.4 speed and he can dust pretty much anybody. So because the corner is playing top down here, Pitts expects this ball from Mariota to be going back shoulder to take advantage of that position, and you can even see him throttle down a little bit so that he could just turn around and easily box out the corner on any back shoulder ball. But instead, for whatever reason, Mariota does not throw it back shoulder, and he leaves this ball deep and into the corner's positional advantage where he can just wall off Pitts and it sails incomplete. Why an 8-year veteran quarterback decided to not throw this ball back shoulder to a 6'6 receiver who was running his route with the right idea, I will never know, but he just didn't. Marcus was not the only one to make a mistake on post-snap reads though, and in my opinion, Pitts himself could also be blamed for some of his ineffectiveness on downfield targets, like on this snap, which was one play earlier in that same drive. Arthur Smith dialed up a super sale concept here out of what's colloquially known as a dirty bunch by some coaches. And the thing with this high 7 route that Pitts is running, which is the mid-level option in this concept and typically the most targeted route in this concept, is that if they're not putting a direct cap over that route with, say, a zone corner that's in a deep third that's staying over the top and has eyes on the ball, if you don't have any kind of cap like that, you have got to get depth, because more often than not, you're going to have a DB either trailing you in man or there's going to be some kind of curl flat corner that's sinking underneath you. You've got to get deep and run under this ball and trust that your quarterback is going to get it to you. On this throw, Mariota actually did read it correctly and he put it in the right spot on the boundary because there was no cap over the top. He left it high, he left it deep, and he allowed Pitts to have a chance to run under it, but just for whatever reason, he took way too flat of an angle as if there was a hang corner over the top, and there was not. And since he was too low and too flat, he just couldn't adjust to it. And once again, it fell incomplete rather than going for probably 25 or 30 yards here. This one, in my opinion, is on him. He's a pro at this point. He's got to read the coverage correctly and get to the right spot that he needs to be in, and he just didn't. This is the kind of stuff that's so frustrating to me because there have been so many plays where either Pitts didn't run a route like Mariota expected him to, or Mariota didn't make a throw to the spot that Pitts expected him to, and both of them almost equally just could not get in sync with one another. If they're going to fix this problem, fixing that chemistry issue is the first step. Nothing is going to get better without that. But once they do fix that, from a schematic perspective, there's still a lot of different ways that the Falcons can use Pitts to be an ultra-productive weapon, even when they're calling limited numbers of passing plays per game. If they want to just dial up easy throws from Mariota that are, by definition, hard to miss, they can give him some screen passes and just let Pitts use that size and speed to out-talent people. He's gotten barely any of those this year, probably about 3 total, which to me doesn't seem like enough. They can also put him out wide and reduce his split in order to force a corner to play either head up or with outside leverage. And again, once that corner is outside leverage, they can run a glance route inside, and his big frame is going to do all the hard work for him. Again, they've hardly done that this year, even though it's really easy to make it work with a 6'6 receiver that runs 4.4. Any offensive coach would tell you that's pretty much just stealing yards, but whatever, I'm not an NFL coach. Even on play-action shot plays, they can use him as the mid-level or deep threat on those flood concepts that they love so much, instead of using him underneath. But once again, I think they've only done that maybe 7 or 8 times this entire season, so they can pump those numbers up a little bit. Most of all though, once Pitts and Mariota finally fix their chemistry issue, whenever that may be, they can go back to doing what Pitts is better at than almost everybody else, and that's winning on back shoulder fades and winning on jump balls down the boundary. Once those are working again, the Falcons will get everything else on this list. Screens, glance routes, crossing routes. They'll get all that stuff for free because defenses will be utterly terrified of giving up the go ball deep down the field. So in summary, theoretically, there is still a way to fix this. You just have to believe that suddenly the Falcons are going to throw the ball more from a traditional drop back passing game and not bootlegs and sprint outs all day every day. You have to believe that Pitts is going to get better at reading coverages, and you have to believe that Marcus Mariota will get more consistent with reading DB leverage and delivering accurate passes down the sideline. If you believe all of that is going to happen, well, you've got some hope. I'll be honest, this episode was not meant to make you feel better about drafting Kyle Pitts. I don't think anything could at this point. And yes, there are some schematic things that they could do to better maximize his talent, which we laid out. But do you actually trust the Falcons to do those things at this point? Because I don't think I do. Like I said, I drafted him too for multiple teams, so I'm screwed just like all you guys are, and that sucks. I feel like I'm throwing away a third-round pick at this point. But I think that the key thing is I want you to share in my suffering by understanding why we're all screwed, because if we're all going to go down with this ship at this point and our season is tanked, we should at least be aware of what icebergs did the most damage, so that hopefully we can avoid those same icebergs in the future. Does that metaphor work? Does that make sense? Yeah, it's probably okay. I'll see you guys next week.